Right, good afternoon. We've started the stream. Welcome to those who are joining us online. I'll declare this Extraordinary Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee meeting open. We have Councillor Clark on Zoom, and apologies from Councillors Abbott and Lush. Would somebody like to move that the apologies received? Councillor Lewis and Councillor Crackett. Put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against? Carried. There's a major late item that I'll move that we accept, and that's a report aligning local pandemic response measures to the national guidance. Somebody want to second it? Thanks, Leslie. Put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against? Carried. The primary purpose of the extraordinary meeting is the adoption of the annual plan consultation document, remembering of course that it is the document that goes out for consultation. Is Rhiannon introducing this?
It would seem not. In fact, it would seem that we are light on staff.
Well, there's a few next door. Someone here.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Oh, okay.
And that gives me the opportunity.
What happened there? No, Rhiannon's just been there.
No, Rhiannon, I think, is supposedly joining on Zoom.
We'll put you.
Okay, thank you. I'm with you now.
PP. PP.
Oh, it's just there. I'm usually there. I'm standing there. It's got. Show you what we know.
Cool. Thank you. That's fine.
Apologies for the delay.
Indeed. Exactly what I was about to say.
If he wasn't wearing a mask, I'm sure I could see the sweat on Michael Morris's upper lip.
You are on fire.
No, that's Lawnville. Any clue, Michael? Or do we...
Not a Rhiannon waiting in there, but the second presenter is ready.
Sorry? Oh, okay, look, if we go to the late item, yep, that'll give us a chance to track down. Welcome, Pania.
My apologies. Roadworks on the road.
I hope it's transit. Wakakotahi roadworks and not in the city. Don't answer that, please.
Right, here's.
Right, this is the late paper that you've got on the table, and both Steve and Richard have the opportunity to present that to us. Who's leading off? Mr. Gibbling?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Your Worship, councillors. Look, as we've been doing over the last month, we've been keeping this committee abreast of the changes going on with the COVID protection framework. So this paper just continues that trend. I'm going to pass over to Richard, and he's just going to talk to you briefly about what we're proposing today following the government's, or anticipating the government's changes to the protection framework tomorrow, and seeking to delegate the decision making to the Chief Executive. So I'll pass to Richard to talk through the report.
Thank you. I'd invite you to think of this report just as a bit of good housekeeping in preparation for tomorrow's report. We would, of course, always have a preference to make it reach the publication deadlines and have it debated, but this isn't one of those reports. This is not saying we will make a decision, but simply saying that we may need to delegate to in order to not be out of step with the government arrangements. So last December we came together, we debated, we heard community views, and we listened to the views around the table. And we want to assure you that we will continue to keep those considerations front of mind if anything does need to be changed. But what we want to avoid is when tomorrow's announcement comes out from the government, if there is anything that requires a local and immediate response, we know that our community won't necessarily see the difference between an announcement made from government and what happens locally. So we want to be able to answer their questions. We want to be able to respond to how we will react to those decisions tomorrow. We don't have a crystal ball. Gosh, it would have been nice to go through this pandemic with a bit of foresight. We know there's fatigue from change, both around the table here and our community. So when a decision is made, we want to be consistent and quick and swift in following whatever decisions or guidance is given. The paper in front of you has 2 key points to it. It talks about the local response measures. So those are things that we have decided under discretionary powers or in the interests of our community. And one of the major ones that we've talked about quite a bit is the use of My Vaccine Passport. And we suspect there will be, and that'll be in the discussion, which is central government will tell us all about tomorrow. So just to recap, when we made that decision, a lot of debate around the table, it was widely considered the right decision and a precautionary decision to protect our community. But at that time, the conditions were slightly different. We were trying to fend off Delta. We had lower vaccination rates. Children could not be vaccinated. So a lot of different things. Plus, most importantly, it wasn't in the community. So we were trying to keep the virus out of our facilities and services. As we progress through the pandemic and understand it more, we know it's in the community, and therefore trying to keep it out of our facilities is almost impossible. So the factors have changed, and we're likely to see a response around the use of that the passports tomorrow. So we want to be able to be prepared, and the best way to do that is in the second section of the paper, which is to say, given the understanding of the views around the table, we propose to delegate that response, local response decision making to the CEO based on risk assessment and the national guidelines. What we're not asking you here today is for a decision around what that decision might be. And we're not preempting, and we're not saying that the Chief Executive will make that decision necessarily tomorrow, but we want to be able to respond to it appropriately once all those factors as risk and guidance have been understood. So happy to take questions.
So bearing in mind, as you say, Richard, that the decision that council made was a little above what the national requirement was, it's our ability to, and I hate this term, pivot, but it's appropriate swiftly with potentially one of a variety of directions that we can go. If it is about that the government announces that the vaccination passports are no longer required. One of the concerns is that it's at least another couple of weeks until this committee meets again, and rather than call an extraordinary meeting to relitigate the issue, it would potentially delegate that responsibility to the Chief Executive. Alternatively, it could be that a date announced is in 3 weeks' time, in which case the decision of the Chief Executive could be, we have this opportunity at the next PPP meeting on such and such a date to review that decision. Is that my read of the?
Absolutely correct, yeah. And there was an interesting article written last night that was on Stuff that mentioned the reason why there's been a delay from Monday's announcement through to tomorrow, Monday's decision through to the announcement tomorrow. It's based on the fact that this isn't a highly responsive time in the pandemic. It's not like when we had to go up a level or introduce a further restriction and we were given 48 hours. We're expecting to see a few triggers that are in the future tomorrow. There might be some immediate stuff, but there might be things that says this region or this DHB is at this peak, so therefore they can have this criteria, and when that happens down here, then we might see the same thing. So there might be a bit of leeway, but we just don't want to be caught on the back foot if, and this is, we're not second guessing anything, but hypothetically, if it was something around when we open the borders to Australians who have vaccination passes that don't work on our system, there might be a bit of conflict there. So it's trying to be able to respond to those kind of issues as they arise sensibly and meeting the expectations of the community, because as soon as that announcement is made, we will have to respond and say what our position is. We're also aware that we've got a lot of frontline staff who have been dealing with the both sides of the conversation as people come into the facilities, and what we don't want is for them to have no script and no guidance about what the council position is, especially when people are saying, but government's just said this, why haven't you, sort of thing. We don't want to put our staff in that position. If we can have that delegated decision, we may, if necessary, be able to give guidance in an immediate effect. Or as you say, wait to the next meeting. Whatever we do, we signalled we would come back to you for further debate and discussion in that December meeting. So we will come back with you, and there will be an opportunity to look at how we've responded to the mandates, to the pandemic, what worked, what we've learned for the future, and also any key discussions and debates that we need to have about returning to a fully engaged community service. So there will be opportunity for that.
Thank you. Okay, councillors, I intend to handle it in this way. If you have any questions, I'll allow those to be asked now, but we'll get into the debate once we actually have a motion on the table. So if we can just deal with questions first, then we'll get a motion, and then we'll have a discussion. Councillor Pottinger, do you have a question?
Yes, it is a question. You mentioned the word risk assessment. Now, council was not forced by government to introduce the passport system.
Correct.
In fact, the CE, who's in control of health and safety, did not implement it either. Yet you were saying to remove the passport system, you would do a risk assessment. Now, I find that quite interesting, because when I look back at the debate on December 7th, council voted, a majority voted, to implement the passport system with no risk assessment. So I'm a bit baffled that you get into something without a risk assessment, and then you use the risk assessment to get out. It's like making a stupid decision and then making a wise one. You know, it doesn't sort of follow logic to me. But
so what's your question?
Why? Yeah. Why the risk assessment?
Certainly.
When we didn't need one, we didn't do one in the first place.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if we cast our minds back, there was an operational decision made, which was to, as I understand it, not to use passports in the first instance. And there was feedback from the elected members to say, hey, we want to just test this with community appetite, etc. Prior to that meeting, we had actually gone through a risk assessment. We do this with all of our decisions. We did a risk profile of our staff and the sort of environments that they work in. We sort of scored that. And we took that in that original decision for what we made. In terms of the report that was presented to you, the risk assessment was much more anecdotal, but the science had been done prior to that, and we'd also followed the risk assessments of the national guidelines.
So, do you believe it was done in accordance with the Local Government Act in the way that elected members have to make decisions?
I'll defer that to probably Chief Executive can answer that, but from my perspective, there was good, robust debate, and there was a lot of information. I don't believe we got to the end of the meeting with anything unsaid or questions unanswered, but I'd defer to Ms. Hadley.
I'm sorry, Councillor Pottinger, could you repeat the question?
The question was that it was under consideration, and I don't believe that our council and its obligation to the Local Government Act and decision-making process actually followed that in considering the risk assessment at all under the requirements of the Act.
Councillor Pottinger, I have no doubt that that report, over which almost every member of ELT sweated over a weekend in order to put it before you and considered the options analysis, with the exception of some days being vax passports and some days not, as Mr. Tribe subsequently suggested. The risk, I think there are two things that you're interchanging here, and one is the risk around health and safety, for which we did a risk assessment on all staff, all positions, I should say, rather than staff, as opposed to the risk which you are talking about there, which may be a wider risk, such as reputational risk or risk to financial budgets, which is a different matter.
Which is covered by the Act.
Which is indeed covered by the Act, and which I'm satisfied that the report you received on the 7th of December would have met all of the standards of the Act.
Council made a policy decision that had viewed that information but chose to go in a different direction.
Correct.
Okay, any other questions? If not, I'm looking for a motion on the table. Councillor Soper.
I'll move both recommendations 1 and 2, Mr. Chair.
Okay, seconded Councillor Amundsen. Now it's open for discussion. Councillor Skelp.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Richard, just should the government make an immediate decision on the passes tomorrow in a very
short time frame, what would be great for other venues within the city is if we could have a collective response in the sense of time frames as well, so that we're not mixing and matching. So I guess the time lag may be an issue in the sense of how we react, but it'd be great, and I'll use our venue as an example, if we could be in line time frame wise and whatever. So
Councillor, I think the timeframes are going to be set nationally.
no, the time frame that we make it communication is the key. It's our communication is the key.
So
we don't have a
can
mixed
deal with
message.
that outside of the meeting.
No, because
Yes.
no,
Sorry. I understand what you're saying, and I don't disagree that we can't achieve it, but it's not actually part of what we're discussing, which is around the decision to be able to pivot.
If it's helpful, we've heard that, and we will certainly make sure that we get the communication out across to our peers.
thank you.
Councillors, any other comments? Councillor Soper.
As the mover, I just want to say it seems to me that we're being invited to make a very pragmatic and sensible decision here. We don't know what the announcement on Wednesday may mean, but we certainly as a council have the obligation to be prepared for it, and this is a very pragmatic way of being prepared. And we certainly know that we have meetings coming up where report backs will take place, so I am quite comfortable in moving this very sensible recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Crackett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just speaking in support of the motion as well. I think it's how you very rightly said that it's just so that we don't get out of step with the rest of the country and others who may choose to open venues across the community when they have the ability to do so. So we don't want to be on the back foot waiting for another meeting or for us to all have to get together collectively. It's a step of proactivity, and it's so we can answer to the community in an immediate fashion.
Anyone else? Councillor Clark, my apologies.
Problems. Listen to the debate around this issue, and just want to reinforce what Claire said and what Councillor Pottinger was alluding to. We can't lose sight of the fact that we have some obligations under the Health and Safety and Employment Act, and that's separate from the Local Government Act. And so while we have some obligation to do risk assessment either way, we still have to consider what the risk will be for our staff and employed, as opposed to risk to the general public using our venue. So just wanted to reinforce what Claire was saying earlier on.
Thanks. Anybody speaking against the motion? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you for that. We return to the annual plan consultation document. Rhiannon, good afternoon.
Kia ora, Chair. So I'll first just draw all councillors to attention to the fact that you've received an updated version of the consultation document that's being discussed in this report.
So that's on tab 5 of board books. That's the latest version.
So that is the version to be adopted for consultation. So just to alert you to what the changes are, they are just small changes, like some of the te reo headings were not yet complete at the time of the agenda going out, so those have been corrected. A few small typing errors have been corrected. A section explaining the difference in rates has just been, the wording has been clarified following the Southern Times article where the meaning was not quite picked up correctly, and some clarification on the options title has been made. So they are all quite small changes, but just to alert you to that. So
Rhiannon, I'm sorry, can I just say to all of the committee, I am aware there was an administrative snafu in loading the document onto board books, given some updates that were made, and for the purposes of true administrative belt and braces, I think it would be wise, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't think about this till this very point, but I think it would be wise to receive this as a major late item, noting that some attachments were dropped And an update, I can see Councillor Soper was also aware of this. Some attachments were dropped, they were reinstated over the weekend, and my thanks to the staff, to the elected members who pointed it out, and to the staff who came in and made that happen. But for that reason, for those of us who take these matters seriously, be wise to receive it.
I'm happy to move that we receive it as a major late item, seconded Councillor Amundsen. Discussion? Put it to the vote. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Apologies for the interruption, Rhiannon.
Sorry, can I just suggest that in the recommendation number 3, the number is changed?
To A3850247?
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Soper. So, in summarising the report, I'll draw your attention to a few key points about the process, and then Patricia is just going to cover off the key points from the financial budgeting point of view. So this consultation document outlines the primary issue for consultation in this annual plan, which is the options for Te Anua, the museum. Those options were confirmed at the infrastructural meeting on the 15th of March. There are a number of other matters for consultation that are supplementary to the annual plan. The next of those is the change of reserve status for Tisbury Reserve, and again the options for that matter were discussed and confirmed on the 15th of March. And finally, the fees and charges will be consulted at the same time as the annual plan, and that will be dealt with in the paper subsequent to this. So the annual plan outlines the changes from the year 2 of the long-term plan. It summarises those changes from a financial and operational point of view, and it provides the community an opportunity to provide feedback to you councillors prior to the final annual plan being adopted before the end of June, and then the rates struck. This report covers off the engagement process for the consultation. There will be a range of resources available and activities online and offline. So happy to take any questions, but in the meantime I'll pass over to Patricia just to summarise the key financial points.
Thanks, Rhiannon. So in relation to the financials, as Rhiannon said, we did start with year 2 of the LTP as the base. However, we've had to change a number of assumptions to reflect the changing environment which we're all facing at the moment. Who would have thought in June last year we would have had a CPI of 5.9%? We were predicting something closer to 2 or 3. So we have reflected some changes of assumptions in this plan. We have maintained our inflation assumption at 2.9 because we haven't seen the increase in the local government cost index, as that was produced before the major inflationary changes in the last quarter. This also, different from the LTP, reflects the decisions which you as a council have made in relation to City Streets Stage 2 and bringing that capital project into next year, and with your preferred option of the museum. So the budgets attached in to the supporting information to the consultation document reflect option 2. So the larger of the museum options includes your City Streets decisions. It also reflects some changes that central government have placed on council, including the increase in minimum wage. And we have now reflected and provided additional budget to ensure that our ICC fair wage keeps its differential to the new minimum wage that will come in on the 1st of April. And we've also reflected that our work programs required some focus in relation to building conditions assessments and asbestos assessments. So additional funding was put in for those and on the repairs and maintenance of our property portfolio. And that resulted predominantly with the change in rates from a 4%, which was the forecast rates increase for 22-23 in the long-term plan, to 7.78%. that and for the average, at present, the average residential ratepayers rates this year are $2,475. That will increase to $2,668. So an increase of $193 per year. In relation to the net debt position, the increase in the capital program does increase the net debt position, and we will see a peak net debt position in 26-27 now of 192 million. However, the 150% revenue benchmark which you've set in the financial policy is met, and this is a result of the increased revenue from rates achieving that. However, there are two benchmarks that will not, and those are the ones around rates affordability, where the level was set at 7.5% rates increase. As the draft goes out, those will not be achieved. So, is there any questions either on the financials or
we are getting tight for time, but I don't want to shortcut councillors' ability to have a discussion. Bearing in mind this is just the consultation document that's going out, and we've got a council meeting that's due to start in about 2 minutes. So I'm going to adjourn this meeting here, and I'll reconvene it at the end of council, because I don't want to cut this short. I mean, we need to value what it is we put out in our consultation document. So I'll adjourn this meeting. Sorry, Patricia, and apologies, Rhiannon, but we'll come back to it once council's completed.
Apologies if you need more concentration.
how's it going now?
Trying to turn the light on.
Or were they sub to?
See that wee cord that's sticking out the bottom there? It needs a plug in.
Actually, Nigel, you just want to play with the colours.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe 70. Yeah. So I'm just looking at how much it costs.
Thank you.
So 2.5 now average.
Today it was fine.
Thank you so much.
I thought you were taking
Blowing it already. Yeah, I was thank you.
Thank you.
I can't see what you're trying to say with the mask on.
Thank you. Are you looking for an increase in funding?
I thought you were putting on twice round the neck.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have an emergency identity.
My bad.
Go Control Alt Delete.
Maybe it's not standing.
Good afternoon, fellow councillors, members of staff, public and the media. Open with the council prayer. Almighty God, grant to us all needed guidance, wisdom and judgment as we face the tasks before us, and enable us now and always worthily to discharge the sacred trust placed by the people in our hands. Amen.
Amen.
Apologies.
Councillor Lush.
And Councillor. Oh no, just Councillor Lush, wasn't it? Yeah.
Councillor Lush, any more?
I'm not aware of any, Your Worship.
Put it to the vote. Do we accept the apologies?
Move.
Seconded.
All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Any declarations of interest? No. Public forum, any submissions? No again. Now the major late items are 4.1 minutes of the Infrastructural Services Committee held on the 1st of March 2022. The reason that the item is not on the agenda is that the report was not ready in time for when the agenda was published. The reason why the discussion of the item cannot be delayed is matters can progress in an entirely timely manner. To be moved that the minutes of the extraordinary meeting of the Performance Policy Partnerships Committee held on the 22nd February.
Your Worship, I think you've moved on from the major late item. You'll need a motion that those minutes be accepted as a major late item.
Yes, all right. Take the track up.
And I think Councillor Amundsen is prepared to move and Councillor Soper is prepared to second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Now we kick on item 5.
Correct.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd move that the minutes of the extraordinary meeting of Performance Policy and Partnerships from February 22nd be received and adopted.
Thank you. Seconder for that.
Second that.
Moved and seconded. Discussion, questions, put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Against? Carried. Move on to item 6. That the minutes of the meeting of the council held on the 22nd of February 2022 be confirmed.
I'll move.
I second that, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. Discussion, questions? Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Be moved that the minutes of the extraordinary meeting of the Performance Policy Partnerships Committee held on the 1st of March 2022 be received.
Happy to move that, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Second that, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion, questions? Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
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 Against? Carried. The minutes of the Performance Policy Partnerships Committee meeting held on the 8th of March 22 be received.
Yes, Your Worship, we certainly have some extraordinary meetings with performance policy and partnership, and with another one to continue after this. But in this instance, I'm happy to move that we receive the minutes from March 1st. March 8th.
And Your Worship, is Councillor Ludlow moving the recommendation also?
Yes, the amendment to the Wellbeing Fund. My apologies.
And there's a seconder?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Edmondson. Discussion, questions, put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
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 Against, carried. The minutes of the extraordinary meeting of the Infrastructural Services Committee held on the 15th of March 2022.
I'll move that, Your Worship, and the recommendations within it, and including the amendments, the alterations.
Is there a seconder for that?
Second that, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Soper. Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. That the minutes of the Infrastructural Services Committee held on the 1st of March 2022 be received.
Yes, I'll move that be received, as well as the notice of motion from was defeated.
The recommendation in relation to the disposal of land for pump
Correct.
station.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll move that.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Thank you. Moved and seconded that we resolution would be that the disposal of land for a pump station purposes, and that the application be made to the Minister of Conservation requesting the portion of land required to be transferred to Southland Regional Council, Environment Southland, pursuant to Section 52 of the Public Works Act 1981, being moved as part of the previous resolution. Urgent business, any urgent business?
I'm not sure that you've put that motion, have you? The motion to receive the minutes and the recommendation has been moved and seconded, but it hasn't yet been put, Your Worship.
Oh, okay. I'll put that to the vote. All in favour say aye.
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 Against, carried. Now we move on to urgent business. Any? None? Thank you. Well, thanks to...
There is public excluded, Your Worship.
Yes, thanks to all the staff who are here. I don't think there's anyone from the media. No. And I'll declare the public excluded session. And thank you for your presence here today.
Your Worship, I'll
Do you want to go?
move that we go into public excluded with the exception of Mr. Grant.
I'll second that.
And what about Mr. Mackenzie?
Not here.
For the reasons as stated in the agenda,
Still live
put
streaming.
it to the vote.
I wonder, Your Worship, we're just receiving minutes. We could actually
Just move them
Carry
to
on.
block.
move to receive them in open meeting.
Okay. Well, if there's no objections, we'll just carry on.
Your Worship, I would be happy to move all 5 sets of public excluded minutes
Second that.
And one recommendation to council,
2,
did I see?
3.
Yes. Including that particular recommendation that I'm looking at. Right there.
Okay.
Doesn't really allow debate that.
So on my run sheet, we go to item 1, be moved.
Your Worship, I'm sorry, Councillor Ludlow, I wonder if we might proceed to public excluded. And
It's fine, I was just trying to save us having to stop
I think
and
we have
start.
a motion on the floor.
Yep.
That needs to be dealt with, and the motion was Councillor Soper moved that we go into public excluded.
Yes.
And it was seconded by
Me, Councillor Abbott.
Councillor Abbott. So the appropriate thing to do would be to put that motion now, Your Worship.
Thank you. Yes, I'll put the motion in. All in favour say aye.
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 Against, carried.
Councillor Clark has a question. Just before could we stay in? I'm not sure, do you need to separate it, Andrew, between council and, no, wonderful. So Councillor Ludlow is probably going to return to the top seat and invite you to change places. And we'll go back to the adoption of the consultation document discussion. If Patricia is in the house.
It went rather well.
Excellent. Thanks for your forbearance, councillors, staff, Zoomers. I'll reconvene the Extraordinary Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee meeting. In our last episode, we had just gone through some of the financial implications involved for why it is that we're going back out to consultation and what's contained in the consultation document. And Patricia had run through some of those reasons. We now are at the stage of seeing if you have any questions, first of all, before we move into debating a couple of issues, bearing in mind that we're not debating the issues. These are questions.
Just a question.
Absolutely. Councillor Arnold, please.
I've just got a wee bit of a question. When we go to consultation with this document, because this is a consultation document, if the majority of the feedback come back and say, hey, look, we're absolutely against that, do we have a plan to trim off 1.9 of expenditure or defer something? Is there like a plan B? Because that could happen, couldn't it?
Mrs. Hadley?
Because it's consultation we're going out for.
Yeah.
So is there a...
So, Councillor, I'm going to stick to the rules around process. I know, call me a bureaucrat, but let's be a good one.
I do.
So, the real process is that you're going out to hear people's views. And I encourage you all to have an open mind and to hear from all sectors of the community as to what they like and what they might not like. We will come back with a report at the end of consultation and tell you submitters' views. You will determine whether you will take those views into account or whether you have more information than they do or can see other reasons. If you wish to trim, can I round it up to 2% and make it easy? If you wish to trim 1%, 2%, 5%, then it's absolutely within your purview to do so. However, you would need to take into account what were you going to change in the levels of service and whether that in itself needed consultation.
But my question to you, Mr. Chief Executive, is you would have to show us where we could possibly do that. That was the requirement.
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
Chair, I'm very happy to meet this challenge. This is a partnership, and I would be very happy for the team and me to give you some suggestions. However, I will say publicly that those suggestions which have been made that have driven the prices or the rates increase up, some are as a result of previous council decisions where you were advised of what those increases would be, and some are as a result of officers saying to you, we need to do a better job. I'm thinking specifically around the property area where there's earthquake assessments to be done, condition assessments, things that we need to do as part of asset management in preparation for the next long-term plan. They're boring. The community doesn't see much for it, but equally they are where the audit office will tell you that you, the elected members, have not done your job correctly if you don't have that information to make decisions. Where you say to me, look, the community just can't bear this cost, we need to trim our sales, how can we do that? Then I would say to you, here are some choices, you will need to make some decisions. And that's where it can be very difficult for elected members because quite frankly it can be where you feel the heat.
That's what we're here for.
It is what you're here for. And I could suggest to you that we could sell some pieces of land that would mean that we'd get more rates in or reduce our operating costs. I could suggest to you that we would have less attractive gardens in our roundabouts or the street edges. I could suggest to you that we would reduce the hours of operation at some of our facilities, such as the library or the pools. Some of those would mean that we would then need to go back and ask the community, which do you want most, higher rates or lesser hours? So it becomes a really complicated roundabout, and that's where I say it's not always easy.
Thank you.
Councillor Arnold?
No, I think
Councillor
that's a good
Pottinger.
explanation, which is
Just following on from that, the CE raises a good point that really the only options in this annual plan, if we want to chop something, we can chop something that is new to the long-term plan. Is that right, Claire? So rather than if we go and try and chop a level of service, we would have to reconsult.
Mr. Chair, there are levels of service and levels of service. What I mean by that is that the Herbert Street Roundabout's a great example where we've actually done a different presentation that will have an ongoing reduction in operating costs. But for us to do all of the roundabouts in the city at one hit would be a big cost and not in the program. That's a level of service that we wouldn't need to consult on. But changing the operating hours...
Yeah, that's the type of thing.
Where it had a significant impact, the word significant always goes hand in hand with the levels of service, that would have an impact that we'd need to go back. Another example I would give you is that the customer service centre now opens at 8:30 instead of 8 o'clock. We didn't consult on that. But if you were to change its levels of service from being open 5 days a week to 4, then I think that would have a significant factor put in front of it that would mean that you'd need to consult.
No, thanks. That's answered that question.
Thanks. Councillor Clark.
Sure, just a couple of, just a reflection really for me, and a couple of questions for Rhiannon a bit further on in the documents we're putting out. So from my perspective, the document, and I'm not trying to relitigate this, I know it goes out to the community and we need to get it out there, but from my perspective, we haven't disclosed enough information in this document to show the public why we are going to the additional 3.78% on top of the LTP without looking at other options. And Councillor Arnold's quite right to raise those. There are a range of them, but they're not all in personnel costs, as the Chief Executive suggests. There are a whole raft of areas that we could, instead of cutting costs, actually increase our revenue or our funding base. So we don't necessarily need to go out and say, well, we're going to cut this service, we're going to cut that service because we don't approve 7.78. Because the other side of the equation is a balanced budget is a match of income or revenue versus the projected expenditure. So you don't have to cut the expenditure, you can actually increase the revenue. But I'm not here to debate that today. There's another place for me to do that. So I just wanted to reflect on that. I think there's a range of other options that we may or may not have considered. I know I've spoken about them in the past, but the document doesn't show our ratepayers that we have done some due diligence on those options. And I think they have a right to know that before we start talking about an increase higher than the long-term plan. The last issue for me is just purely on tab 5 of board books on page 136. And there's a comment there, a sort of frequently asked questions provision. And what it does is it says that we, with the new designs going forward for the new museum, are not committed to a pyramid shape. And I wonder why that is, because we had significant feedback from our community about a year ago that one of the things they wanted to retain was not necessarily the pyramid roof, but the pyramid shape. And if we're going to go out and consult with people about this, I just don't understand why we drop that in the design factors.
Rhiannon?
I will pass on the specific on that question to Steve Gibbling if he is present.
Yeah, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor, where we're at in the design process with Te Anua is spatial considerations to establish the best option, and the primary focus of the work, as you know, has been around establishing the vision and critical success factors. It hasn't been towards designing a facility or telling the design team we want it to look this way. We just had to focus on vision, critical success factors, and the location, which is the decision from the long-term plan. That's about as far as we've gone. But we can certainly, through this process, all three options are being discussed, and we're looking forward to hearing back from the community what they're looking for.
Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I would dispute the fact that the public do want that shape. There was comment made, but there was no way in the world an overwhelming desire to keep it. And there was, I cannot remember at any stage any significant weight of people who wish to keep the pyramid shape going forward.
Right, councillors. Sorry, who did I miss? Who are you pointing at, Alan?
Nobby's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Is your hand up again,
Yep,
Councillor Clark? My apologies.
Just as a point of clarity, I won't get into it today, but I will find the feedback from the community that did recommend the pyramid, just for Councillor Pottinger's benefit.
Might be
Thank
useful.
you.
Thanks. Right, we're after a motion, which brings us back to the recommendations. There are 4 of them with that correction on number 3 to 8385247. So 4 recommendations. Somebody prepared to move? Councillor Scout and Councillor Soper. It's open for discussion. There is none. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. And thank you for doing so unanimously. We look forward to people taking the opportunity to participate in providing us with some feedback. I mean, obviously, sometimes the idea between about a long-term plan is that you shouldn't have to go out and do an annual plan, but when you need to move as much as we have, obviously there's a need for consultation. So we look forward to hearing what people have to say. And thanks to those who've responded so far to Amelie for the various consultation events. There being no further items of general business, I'll move that the meeting is closed. Now I'll close the meeting, end the stream. Thank those who've joined us on stream. Sorry.
You didn't move.
No, good thing it didn't go to a vote. No. The adoption of the fees and charges schedule. Oh goodness me! Thank you.
Massive.
Thank you, Deputy Chair.
Actually, it was a gasp from Rhiannon that's attention first.
I did start raising my hand, so thanks to those that spotted. Yes.
A small interpretive dance next time might be useful.
Yes, so the fees and charges are provided here again for adoption prior to consultation. I'll just touch on some key points. So as always, the cover report provides an overview for where the officers are making recommendations for changes to the fees and charges. A number of factors have been considered in putting these recommendations together. Those include, of course, making sure that we are covering costs in providing services and making sure that we are not requiring rates income for those services where the most suitable mechanism to cover costs is through fees and charges. Officers have considered different approaches to providing some services, and that is explained in the cover report. I'll draw your attention to the fact that many of the fees and charges, particularly in the regulatory area, are set by different pieces of legislation. That there have been no increases in these fees and charges at this time, and therefore we have written to Local Government New Zealand to draw attention to the fact that costs are going up, and that it would be useful for central government to consider these matters to ensure that local government has the tools needed to cover costs. So all of the different changes in the fees and charges are laid out in the table within the report, and a document based on this will also be provided to the public at the time of consultation to aid them in providing feedback on the fees and charges. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors? There are none. There are 3 recommendations. Is there a mover? Councillor Scout, Councillor Pottinger. Mrs. Coote.
No, I support it.
Oh, okay. In that case, I'll put it to the vote. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. This time?
This time.
You sure?
No. I do know there was a briefing afterwards, but that's not actually forming part of this meeting. So this time I will thank the Zoomers for their appearance and declare the meeting closed.